Hey guys, welcome back to Fix It Friday. So this week we are going to be looking into the Panasonic Q. So for those of you guys that don't know, the Panasonic Q is a Japanese version of the Nintendo Gamecube, and what distinguishes it is that it has a built-in DVD player in addition to a Gamecube. Aside from that, it's just really beautiful aesthetically, and it has backlit controller ports and everything like that. So these are really highly sought after, and they're very cool. The downside is that they are very complicated, so taking them apart is really hard, repairing them is really hard, and unfortunately these things are quite fragile, and a lot of times they just don't survive the shipment from Japan to the United States. So with this one, we've got 2 or 3 things on our plate. So we're going to be taking the original drive rails off because they are cracked and shattered. I think they were probably damaged in shipping. And we're going to be replacing them with some 3D printed parts. We're also going to be installing a Japan to USA region switch so that we can easily toggle between the Japanese firmware and the American firmware and play both types of games. And then finally, we're also going to be installing this ViperGC. So this is a mod chip, and this is in fact compatible with the Panasonic Q. Not all of them are. So I'll go through all the steps needed to install that as well. All right, guys, so let's get started. Okay, so to take apart the Panasonic Q, there are quite a lot of steps. Firstly, there's going to be 8 of these silver-colored screws on these side panels, and they're just standard Phillips screws, so a Phillips screwdriver will take care of the job. And then if you lift up and out, you can pull these side panels off. So I'm going to go ahead and just do that real quick. Yep, there we go. And then here on the back, there are quite a large number of black screws. They're all the same, they're all Phillips screws. So next order of business will be to go through this entire black back panel here and remove all of those black screws. And then finally, down here on the bottom, there are 2 more black screws that you need to remove. So they're all the same. Again, you don't have to keep track of them. They're all interchangeable with each other. So taking all of those out is the first step. So now we can go ahead and remove the top panel. So we just need to take this connector off, and this one down here as well. And then if you grab your fingers underneath the lid here, you can kind of just pull to disconnect it from the back. And then you just kind of pinch here on the sides, and now we've got the top removed as well. And so here, you've now got 3 different connectors. One is a flat flex cable. Just pull it out. And then these 2 guys are socketed in. So you just got to remove them as well. Come on. There we go. Okay, so now let's take a closer look at the DVD drive. Okay, so right away, just looking at the tray here, we can tell that there's some kind of issues, because you can see that the drive is just free floating around in here. And so this is what happens when it takes that long trip from Japan to the United States. You have like 4 feet that are screwed into this hard piece of metal, and I guess the friction of just moving things around causes that plastic to shatter. This stuff is basically like glass. It's super fragile. It breaks just by looking at it. I mean, it's ridiculous. And once it's free, then this thing just acts like a little hammer and just moves around, smashing everything in its path. So that's the part that really makes dealing with these difficult. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and try to very carefully remove the DVD drive without having any issues. Okay, so now that the drive has been removed, we're going to go ahead and fully take it apart. We've got to be very careful here because it's such a fragile thing, so you got to really watch your step with all of this. So the first board you have to take is this outer board, and it just has 2 screws holding it in place. Okay. Just like that. This second board here has 4 4 screws. Okay, and so now we've got to just disconnect this ribbon cable right here. This is what's connected the DVD laser to these control boards. And then there's also a little set of wires coming out here. Those have to get disconnected. There we go. And then finally, one more set of connectors down here. Okay, so these boards are now free. I believe we can just lift this up, yep, because normally this is screwed into place, so the rails normally go in these four corners, but as you can see, they have been completely destroyed. Okay. So we're getting closer, getting there. You can see sometimes this cable gets hit by all that impact, but it seems like it's okay, it's intact, so that's a relief. So now, to fully remove the rails, we're going to have to take these 6 screws off. And it's actually kind of good that they did not get shattered, because sometimes this gets shattered as well. Okay, we're just about there. Now we have these small screws here that just hold the lid in place. And now we can lift, and there's a little piece of metal holding it here, so you just have to lift and pull out. And there we go. Now everything should be completely possible to take apart. Alright, so now that the drive is fully disassembled, this is a really nice opportunity to replace the drive belt, which you can see over here. And probably, as you can tell, these get really brittle, and they stop having that rubbery elasticity, and so, you know, most of the time these don't work anymore, or they barely work. So I'm going to go ahead and just cut that off. And I've purchased a replacement. These are easy to find. You can get them on Console 5, and so that's what I've done. And then to get them in place, you just have to feed it through the gear mech right here. It's the easiest way to get it back in where it's supposed to. And that's it. Now it's back where it belongs. There we go. And there we go. Now we have a fresh belt, and so that means that this will open and it'll eject smoothly. Alright, so now that the belt has been replaced, I've taken the new 3D printed drive rails and I've put them in here. I'm going to put a link in the description for the file so that you guys can make this. I found that it's very good, it's pretty accurate. The only exception is that this portion of the wall is a little bit too thick for the metal cover, so I actually just trimmed this down so that it'll fit properly, but other than that, everything else works pretty well. Well, okay, sorry, one more thing. It's a little tight on this section here too, so I just take these wires and I move them up a little bit just to get them out of the way so they don't get impacted by this little portion here. Alright, so now that that's all set, let's go ahead and reattach these drive rails. Alright, so now that the drive rails are installed, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to add some lithium grease to the sides, because that ensures that the tray is going to move in a smooth kind of way. So I have this little spray-on can of lithium grease. So I just put some on a paper towel because this stuff is a huge mess. And then you just kind of take your Q-tip and just move it along. So now here's the tray, and I was extremely lucky with this tray because it did sustain some damage, but it's just a little bit over here and it's pretty minor by comparison. And you know, one of the problems with these trays is that if the teeth break or if any of these little rails break, then it's no longer going to work properly in here. And unfortunately, there isn't really a good replacement yet for these trays. I'm hoping that I can make a resin cast of this tray and then make a proper replica, because I have at least one Panasonic Q that needs that. And then if that's possible, I'm going to release that information so that others can make their own trays. But let's go see how this one does. So we're just going to pull this back so that the laser goes down. Yeah, it seems like it works. Okay. Alright, so I'm still here working on this drive, and what I found was that when I put the tray back in, there are some imperfections in the tray, like you can see a few little chipped pieces over here, and that's all it took to prevent the tray from ejecting and inserting properly. So I had to kind of go back to the drawing board because, like I said, I can't really replace this tray. There aren't replacements easily accessible on the internet. So what I ended up doing was printing these very small little shims. They're like about a 1 millimeter wide shim that's about 100 millimeters long and about 3 tall. And what I found is that putting that in really prevents any kind of side-to-side tolerance of the drive, because before what was happening is it was ejecting and inserting and it was going wildly to the left and to the right. It was just really out of control, and so it would fall off of its tracks. But with these little shims in place, it really doesn't have anywhere to go anymore, and so I think this might do the job and make it work properly. So I'm gonna go ahead and reassemble this and test. If it turns out that this works, I'm going to put it up on Thingiverse and I'll put a link in the description. Okay, so let's finish reassembling and see what happens. Okay, so those drive shims definitely did the job, so have a look. So it's perfectly smooth, no issues whatsoever, and the new drive belt is working great. So the drive is finally fixed. So now that that's done, let's go ahead and disassemble the Panasonic Q completely, and we're gonna go ahead and add the ViperGC. Alright, so I've gone ahead and disassembled the Panasonic Q back to where we were beforehand with the drive out. So let's go ahead and tear this down even more so that we can get to the motherboard. Okay, so to take this power supply out, you need to pinch on these two plastic points here. You can use like a flathead pair of pliers like this one here, and just lift. There we go. And then this is power going to this DVD drive board. And to get that apart, you just have to pull this little white latch forward and then disconnect, and then that takes that out. This here is connection for the fan. This powers the fan. So you can just pull that guy out. And then finally there's another fan. I'm sorry, there's another plug rather, right here. This is what brings the power into this little daughter board right here. There we go. Okay, and now I'm going to go ahead and just pull on these metal tabs and get the back plating off. And now we have a little bit more room to work. Okay, so at this point now I have full access to the GameCube motherboard, and there's 6 screws that hold it in place. These are also black, but they're different from the ones that you see throughout the board. So you need to keep these separated from the rest. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the digital port by just lifting up. There we go. And now I can lift the metal shielding. I still have one stubborn screw here that won't come out. Ah, right. One more thing. So there's this little connector right here. This is actually the AV connector. So this thing doesn't have an SNES multi out like the normal GameCube. It has this little socket here. So you have to pull on that, and then that fully disconnects the top shielding. There we go. And now we have access to the GameCube at long last. There's 6 screws here, and these just hold the heatsink down and keep the motherboard in place. So I just have to remove those. Okay, and now I can hold down on the case and lift. Whew, and there we go. Motherboard is completely removed. Alright, so I've got the GameCube motherboard here in front of us, and I've gone ahead and removed the heatsink, and I just do that just by putting a little gentle force upward on the heatsink. You want to be careful when you're doing that because there are some small components here that can get damaged, so you just want to be careful. Like I just used this, and I just kind of pushed up and then twisted, and that's all it took to remove the heatsink. So what the ViperGC is basically an IPL replacement. So it replaces the BIOS and it lets you run DVDRs potentially, and it may be region free, but this is something I'm not entirely sure of. This is a very old mod chip. These are probably about 15 years old at this point. They haven't been made in a very long time, so the owner of this was pretty lucky to find it. But it is definitely documented to work with the Panasonic Q. So thankfully the installation is pretty easy. We're going to be focusing here in this region, and we just have to bridge 2 points together, and then this wire assembly is what connects to the chip. And so we've got 4 wires here, and these 4 wires are going to be soldered into specific points on this connector right here. So I'm just going to be going along with the original, installation documents, and we'll kind of go from there. And that's something I'll add to the description of this video as well for anyone who wants to try to do this themselves. Okay, so the first thing that we're doing is just bridging those 2 points so that they are together. And then from here, we're going to be soldering 4 wires. And it's actually conveniently color-coded, so we don't have to really think about this too much. Okay, so purple goes here. Then we're going to skip a pin. We're going to solder red here. We're going to take black, and we're going to solder it to this ground point right here. And then finally, we've got to solder yellow onto one of the legs of this chip. Okay, so there we go. It's on the second leg right over here. So that's actually all there is to it. Alright, so since we're here and the Q is this far down, and open, we're going to also install the region switch. And the easiest way to do this is with some Kynar wire because it's nice and small. And basically what we're going to do is, you see where it says R6 over here, resistor 6. We're going to solder 2 wires at these points. I'm just going to use a little flux. And I've pre-tinned both of these areas for convenience. Okay. So there we go. That's one of them. The second one, there's a little via right next to the other pad. So it actually is a little bit easier to just put this Kynar wire into the via and solder at that point. This is one of those things I always double check with my microscope as well to make sure that it's actually installed properly, because it's very small. It's just hard to see this with your eyes. Alright, so there we go. Those wires are set, so let's continue with the installation. Alright, so I've gone ahead and partially reassembled the Q, and I just wanted to show you where I was routing all of that new cabling. So what I ended up having to do was remove a small portion of the shielding here, and so I just took a pair of pliers and just kind of pulled on that one chunk which is separated already, so it was very easy to just pull that one part out. So the idea here is that I'm going to take some double-sided adhesive, I've already attached it to the Viper, and I'm going to place it right here so it's firmly attached. And then the ribbon cable is going to go right here. And then this flex cable here, this connects up to a programmer. This is not the GC Extreme version. This is just the original ViperGC. So this is a parallel port. And so the idea here is that you have to connect these two up in order to use the programmer. So from there, what I'm going to do is just route the cabling down through a hole over here, and that should get access to the to this cable through one of the bottom ports on the Panasonic Q. So let's go ahead and get that started. Okay, so hopefully you can see how this works. So you see I have the cabling routed away from the controller port, and then just coming down here through this hole, and then this is where the Ethernet cable, the broadband adapter normally would go. So this area is wide open, so you can just access the cable right from down here. Alright, so I've got even more of the Panasonic Q assembled, and so I just wanted to show you how I finalized some of this installation here. So in a normal Gamecube, these blue wires, they go to the lid open and close switch. But of course, the Panasonic Q has a completely different set of mechanisms to indicate when the door, well, when the tray is open or closed. It's a totally different drive. So from what I understand, these wires are optional or not even necessary on a Panasonic Q. So what I've done is I've just kind of zip tied them into a bundle and then tucked them into this little corner over here. There's no electronics here, there's no plastic. So this way they're out of the way, they're going to be locked in place, they have nowhere to go, and they're not going to do any kind of harm or anything like that. I didn't want to just clip off the wires because, you know, leaving them here means that, you know, this potentially could always be removed and installed on a different system at some point in the future. So for now, that's over there. Now here are those two wires for the region switch from USA to Japan. So all I did was just route them over here to a little spot on the fan, and you can just toggle between regions just by flipping the switch like this. It doesn't matter which wire goes onto which, because all you're doing is just flipping the switch, and when it's flipped, the two wires are shorted together and you have a USA region. If it's not, then the two wires are not shorted and you have the Japanese region. So that's all there is to that. And I have it here because this is a nice little discrete location. It doesn't involve cutting the shell, which I really didn't want to do here. And it means that the user can just kind of open up this side panel if they ever want to switch it back to Japan. But in reality, most of the time someone's going to be using this. So they're probably going to be using it for American games. I really doubt that they're going to be flipping back and forth all the time. So having it like this in a discrete place where you're not going to have to cut the shell, I think is definitely the way to go. All right. So now that this is all set, let's go ahead and finish assembly and see how everything works. All right, so at this point I have almost everything fully assembled. I just left this panel open just in case I need to toggle the region switch. So let's go ahead and turn things on and see if the ViperGC is working. Nice, okay. So it looks like it's booting to this main Cobra menu, and then you can either use the original BIOS, you can boot directly from disk. You have a configuration mode, which lets you change settings on the ViperGC. You can add cheat codes, you can swap disks. So for now, I'm just going to go to the original BIOS and see how that works. Alright, so it looks like I've got to change, or, you know, change the date and time. That's to be expected. So right now I'm in the Japanese BIOS. Let me just do that real quick. Yeah, sure. It can be 2009. No problem. Alright, so now let's power it off again. And now I'm going to flip this switch. And now let's go back to the original BIOS. And now it should be the United States, or the USA region. And it looks like it's remembered the settings for the clock, for the calendar and all that. And now everything is in English. Alright, so it looks like these modifications were a success. So with these two things combined, you can switch between the USA region and the Japanese region. You can also boot from DVD-Rs, so you can have, you know, burned copies of your backups of your games. I think it does region-free, but I don't have any European games to test, so I'm not actually 100% sure. But still, it gives you a lot of functionality. And hopefully this installation guide makes it easy if you're lucky enough to have one of these ViperGCs and you want to install it into a Panasonic Q. Okay guys, so that's it for this video. So if you like this kind of content, consider subscribing to the channel. I have repair and mod videos out every Friday. And then if you've got hardware that you want repaired or modified, you can also contact me directly at oneuprestorations.com. Okay guys, thanks so much for watching, and I will see you next time.